Hello, and welcome to Your Vote Counts. I am Diana Bodker from the League of Women Voters, bringing you this public, nonpartisan voter service program. These 2020 general election interviews are made possible through Capital Community Media via remote technology and in collaboration with the League of Women Voters of Oregon and Marion and Polk counties. For this race, all candidates were invited. Candidates did not receive the questions developed by the League of Women Voters, AAUW, and neighborhood associations ahead of time. The candidates were asked to prepare a 3-minute statement telling about themselves, their qualifications, and their vision for the office if elected. I would now like to ask candidate Brian Clem, who is running for the office of House District 21, to share his opening remarks.
Thanks, Diana. And first, let me thank you all for making this work, both at Capital Community Media Studios, people I know as CCTV, the League of Women Voters, AAUW, and the neighborhood associations. I think it's been a really challenging time for people to connect with one another, and we've sort of gotten used now to these kind of calls in lieu of a real town hall or a candidates debate. But I just really appreciate you trying to make this work and get information to voters. So I'm Brian Clem. I'm currently the state representative for District 21 and have been serving in this role since 2007. I live here in Salem. I have for almost 25 years now. I think next month will be my 25th year. My wife, Carol, and my daughter, Kohana, and our two crazy kittens, Charlie and Clara, all live here in Salem and have for a long time. And as many of you who know me in the past know, I am a pretty moderate person, and my politics are pretty moderate. I'm a Democrat, but I really consider it my job to represent everyone in my district, whether they're no party, independent party, Republican Party, and I really strive to make that work and make government work for everybody who lives here in Salem. I really worry about where we're at right now as a country in terms of division and partisanship, and I do my best to call it out when I see it and try and emulate better behavior. Most people don't care about elections right now. They care about their own lives, and they care about being safe and healthy and having a job and not and having a roof over their head. And so I don't want to focus excessively on what's going on in my life, and instead focus on how I can help them.
Thank you. So our first question is, what can be put into place to create an infrastructure more resilient to fire, floods, seismic, health, and political disasters?
Well, if you mean physically, I'm going to take your answer the way I want. So both. I think there are disaster preparedness, emergency plans, and resilience that for things you've heard of, like for the earthquakes, for the Cascadia event. We do tests every year. I can't remember the exact name for it, but it's not shake, rattle, and roll, but we do these preparedness events where we simulate what would happen in the event of an earthquake. And everybody pretends there's a real earthquake. And the emergency management system gets stood up to see if it can deal with that. Those are things that we didn't really do on that kind of mass scale for a pandemic. We haven't had anything like what you'd seen in California with Paradise, California a few years ago. We hadn't had anything like that. And now we have multiple cities in Oregon, several in the Marion County area that have been completely destroyed. And so I do think there is a greater need for the legislature to spend money on addressing these things. These things aren't free. And sometimes disaster preparedness looks like a wasteful item when you're cutting budgets and people are not getting, they're getting thrown off the Oregon health plan, school days are being cut, teachers are being laid off, and suddenly you have this line item over here for what might happen theoretically in the event of a disaster. And a lot of times it just doesn't make the list because we have really pressing needs immediately. But obviously we can't do that anymore. We have to plan. And so from my perspective, there are emergency management professionals who actually know what to do. I actually served on one of these resiliency task forces myself, and often their packages don't make it through. We have to take it more seriously and listen to the professionals and go through the drills and go through the protocols and pay better attention to them when they're telling us we're not ready for X, Y, or Z. Because they've been saying this actually for 10 years now, that we're not ready for several things, the pandemic being one of them.
Thank you. What plans are in place to address homelessness due to COVID, evictions, forest fires, and the homes that will be lost?
Well, let's start with homelessness in general first. So prior to COVID and prior to the forest fires, we had a major issue here in Salem show up in a real way in the downtown. That homeless problem had been here before. It was just out in the parks. And we saw it every day in the downtown. And we had been working towards a significant funding package. I think it was 40 million statewide, but for Salem, we were trying to get $7 or $8 million for a navigation center and also for a what's called a low barrier shelter. Two different things that the city and I were working together to get money from the state to help with. So I don't want to forget about those folks who were pre-pandemic, pre-COVID. On the COVID side, we have Marion County has purchased or rented, I can't remember which, some hotels to be able to house people. That is going fairly well so far. You asked about evictions. The CDC recently put an eviction moratorium in until December 31st. So we'll see where we're at, I think, on ability legally for a landlord to evict. Part of it has to do, honestly, if people have money in their pockets to pay their rent. And that means job one, which is getting the economy going again in a safe manner where customers feel like they can actually go out and do purchasing and buying, and businesses feel they can reopen safely. Over on the, you asked about the wildfires. On the wildfire side, I worked for a U.S. senator for 5 years. I started the week of the big floods in '96, so I've been through what it means for people to navigate FEMA and the Small Business Administration for Business emergency relief programs and loans. The state of Oregon does have a disaster account for wildfire assistance to people. It's not huge compared to FEMA, but there are grants up to $7,000 that can be given to people who have issues. But FEMA will end up taking the lead on how, and private insurance companies, on how to get money to people to rebuild their homes. In the meantime, I'm at least sitting on stakeholder meetings with the county. They've been coordinating a lot of the efforts on disaster recovery so far, and I'm just trying to let them know that if they need help from the state, I will try and get it. But largely it's been a county and federal role on where to put people and how to make sure people are housed as the rains are starting and you don't want people in tents right now.
What do you think is the future for forest care after our experience with the fires of 2020 in such areas as thinning, replanting roads, and access for first responders?
Did you say forest care?
Yes.
Oh, interesting. That's a good term. I think we have a large problem in our forest care. I'll use that term. I think private landowners often do a much better job than the government does on their lands. I think the state does a decent job, and the feds do a terrible job. We have had many wildfires on federal lands, even dating back to 2004. You may remember around Camp Sherman, and the treatments that are needed to keep the forest healthy have not been happening. They just haven't. The budgets have been actually robbed from those kind of treatments at the federal level and used for other things. Our senators have talked about that in the past. So we need a real effort to produce thinning projects. Now, within the environmental debates, there's a debate about what's thinning and what's logging. I grew up in Coos Bay. My family was involved in the timber industry, working in the mills, and my brother worked for Weyerhaeuser. I interned with them. So I believe that logging is a part of forest treatment and that it is a part of the solution. At a bare minimum, there are things called collaboratives you may have heard of, where we bring in the people who would usually sue each other and we have them work through in advance what a treatment project looked like. We have allocated state money for more of those, and those do develop projects that then don't result in getting tied up in legal battles over the amount of harvest being done. So that's a good solution, but in general, this has got to be a wake-up call. If the smoke a couple of years ago in Ashland wasn't, this has to be a wake-up call that the federal ownership pattern in Oregon is huge, 52% of the state, and their lands are not cared for, and they need to figure out how to do it, and we have to demand that they do it because we're dealing with the ramifications of sick and diseased forests all over Oregon, particularly on federal lands that aren't being taken care of.
Thank you. Address what is needed in school building design or redesign to ensure distancing requirements, airflow, and providing instruction for both K through 12 and higher education?
Well, as the daughter of a 12-year-old at Leslie Middle School who just yelled at me this morning for getting into her screen background twice during her call this morning, I know that right now most parents are struggling with online learning, and how to safely get kids back into school is of critical importance. I can tell you firsthand, we struggled in the spring, really a lot. My daughter struggled. We struggled, my wife and I, trying
All
to do
right.
calls and having, you know, having the eyes on her to make sure she can be successful online when we have our own jobs to do 12 and 15 hours a day. For me, helping constituents, for my wife, serving the Senate, it is a really, really challenging task for people to do online. So from an infrastructure standpoint, hopefully we don't have to permanently alter everything for distance learning. But I've been an advocate for smaller class sizes for years, and that would certainly help. The smaller class size schools came to me, like Blanchette, and said we actually could go to school 5 days a week because we have smaller class sizes and we can spread out with our facility. You have to put money into the public schools to create the kinds of designs you're talking about. When we pass bonds, we should factor those kind of things in. But I also I don't want people to think COVID and pandemics are with us forever. So we can do temporary structures, but I don't want to get the new norm that we all can't go out and visit and recreate with each other. Until a vaccine, yes. But after that, I don't want to redesign every building in all of our lives so there's no human interaction and we're always 6 feet apart. That's not healthy.
All right. How will Oregon fund adequate maintenance personnel for state parks?
Well, as you know, the state parks have a actually decent set aside from the Oregon Lottery in order to fund their operations, and they're in much better shape than most state agencies. And that's something I hope we can talk about later. We are in a huge budget deficit right now. We have already had to cut $1 billion out of the current biennium, and we're going to have to cut potentially as much as $4 billion out of the next biennium from where we're at currently. So finding any money for any agency from the general fund is going to be very challenging. And so, for example, if we have a problem with state park maintenance compared to a problem with short school days, teachers being laid off, I'm going to pick the school days and the teachers not being laid off. And maybe we can't mow the park as often, which is a sad thing, but priorities are priorities. And right now, we have a huge budget deficit. Now, my solution is getting the economy going again and supporting businesses and employers so it won't be as bad. But we have a real challenge with all programs and all agencies. For the parks, I think to a large degree, they have to live off the lottery. And to the extent we can get away with charging user fees to out-of-state visitors more, that's a good solution as well. At some point, you might run into interstate commerce issues, but fees on out-of-state people and the lottery is the way I would answer your question.
All right. What are your major issues, and on what committees would you like to continue to serve? Excuse me.
Yeah, well, economic recovery, safe economic recovery is probably my main one because that solves a lot of problems. When unemployment went over 10% statewide, that's when you started to see our deficits, for this year hit the $1 billion mark. Salem is dependent often on healthy revenues. We have so many people who work for the state who live here that when we're looking at a $4 billion shortfall, that means layoffs in Salem, just like in Seattle when the economy's bad or the airplane industry is bad, Boeing lays people off or Microsoft lays people off. We lay off state workers. And for me, increasing revenue and having a healthy economic climate is a jobs issue. Now, to do that, you absolutely have to have a healthy business climate. So for me, business and labor is a committee I serve on now. I want to be on it again. The Economic Development Committee was one I was on before. I would like to get on it again. And then I expect I will continue to chair the committee called Agriculture and Land Use, and it deals with both promoting and protecting agriculture, which having married a farmer's daughter is important to me, and the land use system, which I think is a hallmark of what keeps Oregon, Oregon. So business and labor, economic development, and probably chair ag and land use.
All right. Thank you very much. Thank you, candidate Brian Clem, for our interview today and for sharing your thoughts. And would you like to make a few comments?
Yeah, thanks, Diana. Thanks again to the League and AAUW and the neighborhood associations. I think out of everything else I've said, you can forget all of it and remember this one thing. The division we are seeing in our country right now is destroying us. We can't keep going like this. I don't even want to turn on the news. I don't want to look at Facebook. I don't want my daughter to see how people talk to each other and treat each other in politics. Now, in the community, I see huge collaborative efforts by people to help one another, regardless of party affiliation, whether it's fight fires, get food donations together over at the fairgrounds, help with COVID, going out shopping for senior citizens, making masks for people who probably voted for Trump, even though you're a liberal, and vice versa. So in our community, I see us coming together. Our politics is tearing us apart. And the pandemic has made it worse, and behavior of elected officials have made it worse. And I penned an op-ed in the Statesman Journal about this topic when members of my own party made it worse with their language, referring to businesses as special corporate interests instead of just people trying to survive and feed their families and house their employees. So more than anything else,
I can't hear you.
more than anything else, we have to tone down the partisanship and work on being Oregonians, not members of a political party, and working together to solve problems, because these problems are real. And to the extent that we work together, we'll meet them. To the extent we divide further and rip each other apart, we will not.
Thank you very much. Okay. Thanks to Capital Community Media for their time and expertise in creating this program and making it available across the state through YouTube and Vote 411. Thank you to the several League of Women Voters Leagues for being interviewers and suggesting questions, and thanks to you, the public, for watching. Your vote counts in order to become a more informed voter. For more voter information, including dates, registration, candidates for state and local areas, and ballot measures information, please go online to vote411.org. You have until October the 13th to register to vote, with ballots being mailed to you beginning on October the 14th. And November 3rd is Election Day. Please remember that postmarks don't count. Elections matter and make a difference, so remember to vote, because your vote counts.